Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. And thanks, everyone, for joining this series. And we have finished 2 sessions in this series, and we are now with the third session. And this is led by a wonderful team. So this whole series comprises of 36 sessions. So there are this is a multi-part series. Let's say the fundamental series, which is now we're covering. This is the third session that we are in now. And after the fundamental session, we have the deep dive sessions. Deep dive will cover the in-depth, the advanced features of the Journey Builder, wherein the fundamentals will cover all the out-of-the-box features of the Journey Builder. And we have various speakers lined up: Jacob, Matthias, Rose Santander, Tim, Michelle, Raphael, Sandesh, Maunir, Hunter, Naveen, Lucas, Ariana, Chad Daniels, and so many other speakers who are lined up for making this series more amazing. And while these sessions are running every Tuesday and Thursday, every week without any break in between, we are having these sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And in between, on every Wednesday, we do have these hands-on sessions. If you're not aware of these hands-on sessions, these are a very detailed demo wherein we do some implementation. We provide access to one of you. So one of you can log into the Marketing Cloud and you can implement while one of us will be guiding through the steps. This is like a build with us. So if you have an access to the org, you can also try building it in your own org. And if you want to be the builder, we will provide you the access to the MC org, and one person can sign up to be the builder of these. So if you are interested, let us know, like Tim or myself, or let us know in the Slack channel. And how you sign up to these sessions is from this registration page, Trailblazer community groups, and in there you will see the Phoenix Salesforce Marketers group. So if you're already a member of this group, you will be receiving automated notifications whenever a new event is being published. So we have published almost all of the 35 sessions in this series. So we have done with the 2 sessions, and the rest of the 33 sessions, including today's session, are all posted. And you can sign up to all these sessions in here. And if you only want to sign up to the hands-on sessions or only to the fundamentals, you can find from this icon. Fundamentals is listed on the icon itself. It is easy for you to distinguish. So you can selectively sign up to the deep dive or the hands-on sessions or the fundamental sessions. And all these sessions are being recorded and they will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, Trailblazing Together, or you can also search using MC Learning Camp. And we will be uploading this in the playlist section you can find. So I'll be creating a different playlist for each of these: Journey Builder Fundamentals, Journey Builder Deep Dive, and the Journey Builder Hands-On. So when you're missing any of these sessions, you can come back here and check all the previous recordings here. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat window and we will address them at the end of the session. And there is also a Slack channel for this one. If you're already part of the Slack channel, please post the questions after the session in the Slack channel. If you're not part of the Slack channel, let me know and I will add you to that channel. I think that is it. I'm gonna take my screen share off, Tim, so you can go ahead and share.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
All clear, yes.
Okay, great, fantastic. Well, thank you, JB. And that's just absolutely wonderful. 35 some odd sessions on Journey Builder. We couldn't be more thrilled to be part of this. And thank you, JB, for all that you do. And thank you for those first 2 sessions. They were unbelievable. For those who didn't get a chance to see them when they come on YouTube, you can't miss them. Just an incredible amount of information on the first 2 sessions. So today we're going to talk specifically about entry sources. It seems a little bit narrow, but it is the most important activity in any journey. We're going to go into that in detail and talk about, if we have time, the contact model and the update contact. So let's go to the next page. I think JB had covered what's coming up next. Definitely look to those future sessions. We've got some great content coming up. And also, we also talked about the hands-on sessions. So today's session, we're going to talk about that entry source. So what is that entry source? That's that first activity in the journey. This is where you're going to be determining who's going to be entering in the journey and all the data points that come with it. We're going to cover the big three entry events or entry sources, and then quickly touch upon the rest. We're going to give you some five journey tips related to entry sources as well, something that we've learned in the work that we've done in Journey Builder, and then touch upon the contact model and the update contact activity. So let's talk about this entry source, why it's important. We sort of talk about these four big areas of what this entry source is doing for the journey. Number one, it's the segmentation. Who's going to be entering in this journey, where they're coming from, what the different sources are, what's going to trigger them to enter the journey, filters that would be fine-tuning that segment, who should be entering, who should not be entering, how frequently they should be entering, should they re-enter, the speed of entry. That's just on the segmentation side of it. A lot of things to consider when you're building out your logic for the entry source. And then there's three other sections, just as equally as important. The content, what are those data points? What are the things you need to think about that you're providing in the journey in the data extension that accompanies that subscriber that's going to populate different data points in your emails or in your communications, like a personalized greeting. You might have variable content. You might have a custom send from who it's coming from, or a custom follow-up sales or service message. All of those data points need to be thought of as you're going to be bringing that data into that entry event. Third area is the journey function. What are those data points that's going to determine the different paths, the different channels they might be communicated to, and what's going to feed all of those journey canvas activities? In our next sessions, next Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to go into deep dives into all of those out-of-the-box journey canvas activities. And I think you'll be able to see the connection of you need the entry source data points to correctly configure all of those activities to make them work. All of that comes from the entry source. And then last but not least, can be just as important, what are those data points that you're going to be using to serve up those KPIs for your analytics? And then if you're doing any sort of error logging, what you need to consider there. So just to give some examples of, some real world examples of these different data points you need to think about when you're creating your entry source. This was a flow diagram that we worked on yesterday in our hands-on session. Thank you, Maggie, who's joined today for volunteering on the hands-on session. But this will give you some examples of those different things you need to think about. So number one here at this point, this is a lead nurture journey where you're bringing in leads from the Salesforce CRM environment and you're sending them then down different paths in Marketing Cloud. So number one is, the leads. Which leads are you bringing in? Which leads are you not bringing in? What's the trigger to pull them in there? So there's your segmentation, thinking about those lines. Once they're in the journey path. In this example, we have a hot, warm, and cold path. What's the data point that's going to determine that? You're going to want to bring that in your entry source and use that in a decision split to carve out those different paths. If you're creating Salesforce activities, as an example of those custom activities, those out-of-the-box activities that you can customize. So if you're creating a task, what are those required fields in Salesforce CRM that you need to populate in order to create a task? And another example we talked about yesterday is if we wanted to create a hot lead notification to that sales rep, you're going to need that sales rep's ID in order to do that. So all of those points are going to need to be put and thought through in your entry source. And then when you take a look at the content, here's an example of an email that has different varied levels of personalization. So, something very simple, the greeting, the first name, and that needs to be added to your entry source. If you're using dynamic content or to display different types of content, what data point's going to determine that? That could be a product field. If you're using dynamic call to actions, different sort of content on that standpoint, you might need an intent ranking value. And then again, that sales rep ID might be used to have a custom message to who to reach out to in email content. Hopefully that gives you some ideas, some context for why it's important to think about to really spend your time and your energy to understand all of those data points when you're working on those entry events. Before we jump in, just wanted to see if there was any questions. I'm going to be stopping for questions along the way. Just want to make sure there are any, if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I'm watching the chat. So we're going to start diving into the big three. So here on the left, you can see, straight from Journey Builder, these are all of your options for entry sources. There's quite a few, but we're going to focus on the big three. These are the ones that you're commonly going to be using when you're building in Journey Builder: the data extension entry source, Salesforce data, and API event. So let's talk about the data extension entry event. This is the number one entry source that you're going to typically use. So pros for this entry source: a ton of control and flexibility. You're creating the data extension, you're creating the segments, you're populating all the values. You'll typically be using SQL or other programs to populate that entire list for all four of those categories, full control on there. You can have unlimited amount of entry sources, right? You can pull data from Salesforce CRM. You can pull data from a data extension that you're bringing in via an ETL, like from a marketing or data lake. You can bring it from Data Cloud. Lots of flexibility there, and unlimited filtering. Lots of options, lots of flexibility. It's to your level of comfortability in SQL. You create the data extension in the field. It's important to note other entry events are not similar like that. Some of the cons: you have to be comfortable with SQL. I mean, if you're going to be creating those, we'll go through a couple of SQL statements. You have to be comfortable with that to really leverage that capability. There is a limitation on the real-time entry. As we know, these will typically be automation driven. And as we know, there is that 15-minute limitation with automations. You can certainly speed that up, but it's not real time. It does require separate automation, separate activities. So when you're creating a journey that's attached to a data extension entry source, you've got another asset you need to build and support. And there's that comment about complicated building and support. So what's it good for? Really, it's good for everything. But here are a couple of options there. So complex segmentation, a lot of different entry sources, a lot of different filtering, something that may not work for, say, the Salesforce data entry event. Commonly good for a bulk send or one-off sends. So let's go into the platform and just take a look at some examples of a data extension entry event. So let's talk about a bulk send. I've got a couple examples here. So we've created a data extension. Here's an example of say you want to send out a bunch of email addresses you're pulling in from, say, a webinar. You've got maybe leads or contacts or different subscribers, and it's pretty basic here. You've got a subscriber key, an email address, and we've got some basic personalization. So you would just add this data extension entry event. You click in, you're going to select that data extension that you have in your folder of that you've created. You can add some additional filtering in here if you want, but just to make this simple. And then in scheduling, you've got some options. You can do a run once, and it'll run as soon as you activate it. All three of those journey members will be sent. You can run it on a recurring basis to happen at certain intervals. So you don't have to set up an automation. You can just select it, run once, and then you're done. So very straightforward from that standpoint. You might ask, why would I do a journey versus just a user-initiated send or a simple send in Marketing Cloud? What the benefits of the journey, a bulk send of the journey is all these activities afterwards. You can send multiple, communications, multiple channels. It gives you the ability to do those bulk sends and all the activities that follow from that. So there's one example of a bulk send. Give you one more example. I've got another data extension here, which is a sample CRM update. We've used this quite a bit. if you are looking to update fields in the Salesforce CRM environment. So this is an example of, we've got some opportunities here, got an opportunity record ID. We're just going to, say you needed to change a bunch of opportunities, the stage of an opportunity to closed won, for instance, based on your marketing activities. You can just create a data extension of all those record IDs, and then just simply add it, just like you did for the bulk send. Select that data extension, and you can run that once to do that updating in the Salesforce CRM environment. So just to give you two different examples of how you can do bulk sends or simple sends with the data extension entry event. So let's talk about integrating a data extension entry event with an automation. So same setup here. You'd want to select a data extension entry event. Let's go to the automation. I've got an automation set. Lost my audio there. Maggie, in our hands-on session, Maggie set up this query yesterday. So we've got an automation it's running a query that is determining, pulling in some leads from the Salesforce CRM environment. So this sort of talks a little bit about how you can use the power of the data extension entry event to pull in all those different data points that we had talked about earlier. So in this query, we're pulling from the lead Salesforce synchronized data extension. We're populating the basic information, the subscriber key and the email, like who we are sending this to. In our where clause, this is what we're determining who should be brought into this journey. So for instance, we don't want all leads. We want leads that have been created within the last day or two. And we want only those leads that have a status of open. And for those content variables, we've got that first name, we've got product, we've got that predictive score that will deliver those different content, that custom call to action in the email itself. That predictive score could be that ranking that might determine the decision split, those different journey paths in the journey. And then we've got that owner ID, which will be helpful for those CRM update or create activities, and will also personalize the email itself. So this gives you the ability, and this is a very simple exercise. You can add, join multiple different objects. So for instance, if you wanted to also check a ranking on the account, you could join the account synchronized data extension, and really build out your logic here and populate that in a data extension. Once that's populated, you'll just select that data extension. And if it is connected to an automation, you'll be able to connect this and have it work from the automation. So if we click into that data extension, and then we hit done, and then if we go back to the schedule box, we will be able to connect it to an automation. So this window you didn't see appeared because the data extensions that we were set before were not connected to an automation. When it's connected to an automation, typically you want that automation to be running. You can select it and hit set schedule. And here is that automation that you've got here. So here's this test lead nurture automation. It is running, and that way, Journey Builder can see it. Doesn't necessarily have to be running, but it is best practice to see that. You select that, select that data extension, that automation, and then you've got options here on how you can, choose how those records come into the journey. Typically, we'll do new records only, and only new records added after activation. You select that, hit done. And there you've got, now you've taken that data that you've brought in from that SQL query, and now you've connected it into the journey. Once you fill out your canvas and you hit activate, back here in the automation, a journey activity will appear if this is connected which is an important point to note. You can add a, it's a little bit kind of confusing. You can, this fire event, some people think that that can actually fire a journey. It doesn't necessarily work that way. You want to, create your journey, create your entry source, data extension entry source, connect it to your automation. Once you activate this journey, in the automation, that activity will appear, and that will actually fire them through the journey. Once you have that set up, you can pause this automation, and you can run it once. You can send in test records. There's a lot of flexibility with the data extension entry source to give you ability to test and prove out your journey. So that wraps up, and then there's a lot on the data extension entry event. Just wanted to check to see if there's any questions related to the two different types of ways you can do a data extension entry source. And please throw some questions in the chat. We'll get those answered. Let's go back to the next entry source, which is the Salesforce data entry source. So obviously you need to have an integration with Salesforce to make this work. A lot of us do. This is a very cool entry source, as we'll go through. The pros is that it's click, not code. You don't need to know SQL. As we'll walk through in the UI, it's very intuitive, easy way to use it. It's real-time entry. We'll walk through an example where if in the Salesforce CRM environment, you set up a campaign and you've got people that have got some contacts and leads, you want to send them right to the journey. As soon as you add them to that campaign, they're brought in instantly into Marketing Cloud, into that journey. Maybe there's a minute delay, but it's real-time entry. No automation needed, right? This simplifies your process. You don't have two assets that you need to manage. Kind of nice that way. And the data extensions automatically created for you, which is kind of cool as well. Some of the cons, as you'll see, that the UI functionality is limited. You're limited to the orientation of the objects that Salesforce has set up. It's fantastic functionality, but there are some limitations. It can be inflexible. And that's when you'll want to, once you find it sort of, you're maxing out what it can do, you always can go back to a data extension entry source. Because it does create the data extension for you, you have to live with these data extension field names. And they're a little bit wonky. You'll see, you have to live with that. The good thing is you can add new fields to those data extensions. You're also dependent on the connector, right? So this is coming through the Marketing Cloud connector. For those who've set that up, it's being fired from the Salesforce CRM environment. It won't work unless you have that connector working. If your connector goes down, all of those journeys will not work, whereas a data extension entry source is not tied specifically to Salesforce. What's it good for? Anything sales and service integrated. If you're ever standing up any of those types of journeys that's pulling data from CRM, definitely try to see if you can make the Salesforce data entry source work. So again, not too complicated object use cases. We're going to go through that in a little bit of detail when we stand one up. And like I said, try these first. Let's go back into the platform and we're going to create a Salesforce data entry source from scratch. So before we do that, just to set the stage of what we're doing, our use cases, we want to pull in anybody who gets dropped into a campaign in the Salesforce CRM environment. So let's say marketing they just went to a webinar. At the webinar, they created 100 or 1,000 different leads, and they want to drop them into a journey. So how do we do that? Well, you can create a campaign in the CRM environment. We've created a basic campaign here. We've added some statuses in this campaign that's going to sort of flag them as they come through in the journey, maybe update them along the way. We're going to use this add to campaign status to trigger when they should be pulled into the journey. We haven't added the campaign members, which we'll do that in a second. So what we want to do on the Marketing Cloud side is use the Salesforce data entry event to say, whenever somebody enters in this campaign, whether it's a contact or a lead, with a status of add to campaign, we want to bring them to our journey. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's that Salesforce data entry event or entry source. We'll click in here. It's important to note there's a couple options here. You can click on this Salesforce campaign. Please explore that. It's a little bit limited. We typically will go the Salesforce data route. This gives you access to all Salesforce objects, not just the campaign side. So here we're just going to type in campaign. And for those who are familiar with campaigns, or if you're not familiar with campaigns in the Salesforce CRM environment, when you drop a campaign, a lead or a contact in a campaign member is the actual subscriber, not the campaign ID. So when you're selecting that, you're going to want to select a campaign member. What's kind of cool, again, this clicks not code functionality. This is a very important part of this setup. You can choose, the contact, who's the person, the actual campaign member. You can also choose who dropped them into that campaign, which is kind of handy. So if you need to send a note, a message to the person who dropped them in and say, yeah, you just dropped in 1,000 campaign members, you can certainly do that. For our example, we're going to select the actual lead or contact. It's also kind of cool. You can select either contact or lead or both. So we're going to select, again, this is who the communication is going to. It's a very important step to make sure you get that selected correctly. And now we're going to talk about the triggers. So we typically will do, whenever this campaign member is created or updated in the Salesforce CRM environment. So it's important to know that. You can always just do created or updated. And then just like we talked about in the Salesforce CRM environment, we want two filters. First of all, we want to pull in only those campaign members for this specific campaign ID, right? We don't want to pull in all campaign members in the Salesforce CRM environment. So we just bring over that filter. It's got all of these filters for the campaign member here. You just drag it over. And then we're going to go back to the Salesforce CRM environment, and we're just going to pull in this campaign ID from the URL, which is the ID for that campaign. We're going to drop this in here. It's also important to note to wait a second. You see how that populated? You want to make sure you wait a second and you click on that and then hit done. If you don't click on that, you hit done, it is not going to select that campaign ID. Important to note that when you're doing your setup. Okay, the second thing that we want to do for our filtering is we want a specific status. So I'm going to bring over the status field, and this is a pick list, so super easy, and it was add to campaign, done, super easy. You can add different filters here. It's kind of cool. So for instance, if you wanted added or add to campaign, you can go in here, you can change this to an or. So you've got a lot of flexibility here, this can fight you a little bit too. So, definitely play around with it. A lot of options here. Again, it's not something you have to worry about writing a filter on a where clause in SQL. It's all clicks, not code, so super handy. The next section is complicated and definitely worth exploring and utilizing, I think, once you do a couple of these journeys. What the filter criteria allows you to do is add an additional object or objects to your entry criteria. So now in our example, you could say, I want leads or contacts who are dropped in this campaign, and I want the associated opportunity for that lead, for instance, and they have to be in a certain stage. So that you'll have that limitation of what's available here. Like I said, the UI is limited. So in that use case, you don't have that ability here. There is no opportunity object. You can't add it. It's what's available based on the object that's available in Salesforce CRM. So maybe that wasn't the best use case for that, but you can add additional objects in here and create some additional filter criteria. So you have a multi-object level filtering in the Salesforce data entry event. It's very specific though, and limited to the UI that you have. It definitely works. Another thing to consider is that you can't use this filter to trigger the journey. It has to be triggered by this entry criteria. The primary object, the campaign member, is what's going to trigger that. So for instance, if you had, you set it up this way where you had records that were added to campaign, they were dropped into the campaign itself, and say in the filter criteria, you had another object that said it needed to be this flag, and that object was flagged after they were entered into the campaign, they wouldn't be brought in the Journey Builder. The additional filter criteria has to be met first, and then the primary filter has to be met in order for that to be entered in the journey. Sorry, that was a little complex. Maybe we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a deep dive session. So anyways, dive into this if you want to, but I typically skip it. The last part is the different data fields that you want to populate in your email in order to render that personalization. Again, you're limited by what Salesforce gives you. So there might be some complications there, but for example, if we wanted to pull in first name, you just click first name and it appears. It's super cool. You don't have to, write again in that select statement in SQL, super handy. Check the box, it appears. These are all the ones, these are the default ones that get populated. You can just select the different options and select those, move on to the next step. And then this gives you the summary of what you just created. So the who are we sending this to? This is going to contacts and leads. The object, it is the campaign member, not the campaign. Action, when it's created or updated. What's our filter criteria? It has to be from the specific campaign with a campaign member status of add to campaign. And then the related objects criteria, this is default. And then these are the different data points that you've selected to populate in your data extension. So let's click done. We're going to hit save. A quick tip on Journey Builder, always good to save, especially when you're standing up different functionality that might take a few minutes. You can, Journey Builders have had this experience, it can time out on you. It allows you to build all this stuff. It doesn't sort of fall off, and you could hit save and make a little error out for you. So just definitely save as much as you can. So we're going to activate this entry event just to populate the data so we can show you the data extension. So just to do something really basic here, I'm going to add a decision split, and we're just going to say email not null, and we're going to select this. We'll talk a little bit if we have some time on the contact model. This is the contact model in Journey Builder. JB had covered this. This is the attribute contact model that's in your data designer, all the different data extensions that are updated. For this example, we are going to use the journey data. We're just going to select the email address, and we're just going to say is not null, so that they carry through on that journey. It's something to get the journey, give an activity in the journey so that we can activate this journey and see if we can populate it with some data. We're just going to end these entry sources down to 1 minute. Let's hit save. I had already named this and dropped this into a folder. And then last but not least, before we activate this, we're just going to do the entry settings, re-entry only after exiting. You can see it automatically populated the email field naturally. That's kind of handy. Let's hit save. We're going to activate. We might get a warning message here that we don't have a communication activity, no messaging activity. That's okay. So why I'm doing this is that whenever you're setting up these Salesforce data entry events, sometimes it's challenging just to get subscribers into your journey. That's the big hurdle. So you can, as you're working through, if the first time you're working in connecting a specific object and pulling them into a journey, you can do something simple like this, where you just want to get the two platforms talking. and pulling in those objects. This will populate the data extension, and you can also see all the data that comes through as well. Okay, so this is active. Let's go back into our Salesforce environment. We're going to go to our leads, and I'm just going to select myself as a lead. It's going to add to a campaign. I'm going to select this Journey Builder Bootcamp test, add as a campaign. It automatically comes up, add to campaign. Typically want to use this overwrite member status. That's best practice when you're using adding a campaign member that is going to be brought into a journey. I'm going to hit submit. And we're also going to do the same for contacts as well. I got a contact here. We're going to click add to campaign. We're going to select that same campaign, add to campaign, overwrite member status, and submit. Let's go back to that campaign. We should see those campaign members populated. Let me also zoom in here, realizing I'm a little bit out of zoom. Let's view those campaign members. Yeah, so you can see one's a lead, one's a contact that you got entered in the campaign. Let's go back to Marketing Cloud. Let's refresh this journey. You can see these two contacts have been evaluated and accepted, so it's working. That's all good to see. Sometimes it takes a second for the journey to refresh and show in the canvas. Yeah, they're not populated there, but if they show, another tip, if you click on this view entry event, you can see this data sooner than in the journey canvas. Sometimes it takes a second there. But let's go to the data extension itself. We should be able to see the data in the data extension. So again, it can be helpful for you to validate the data, especially if you're setting up these object Salesforce data entry sources. So here's the data extension that got created for the journey. And to find the name of that data extension, you can see in this entry event, this is the data extension that Journey Builder created for you. So we'll go to that data extension. Also, one thing to note, it will typically drop it in the default, the overarching data extension folder. So here we go. Here are those two records. Here are those field names. Again, they're created by Salesforce, and they're a little bit wonky, right? Campaign member :ID, campaign member :common ID. So you sort of have to deal with them. If you're doing queries against them, they can be a little bit cumbersome, and they can be a little bit finicky in AMP script, but you don't really have a choice there, but something you have to work through. And then here's that data. So really helpful for you to see that data populated, to get them in the journey, and then just to see that data come through. So, in the example here, we've got this common ID. It's helpful to see. We've got a lead here, right? 00Q is a lead. Here's a contact, 003. It's helpful just to see the data as it's coming through, the different email address. This is that campaign member ID, the two different campaign members. And then there's the basic personalization field that we added, the common first name value there. So we typically will, get that data populated in that journey. That will be helpful to use when you're creating your content to align your AMP script based on these variables. Again, it's these unique data value names. You could always create a test data extension with these naming conventions, but it's often easy just to get subscribers in your journey, just using a decision split to understand what your data set is. With all that data set, you can align it throughout the entire journey and through your content now that you can see that. Any questions? Oh, let's see, we've got some questions. When do we need to choose Automation Studio over Journey Builder or vice versa? It's a great question. I think, hopefully this example, and now that you see the data extension entry source, an automation fed entry source versus a Salesforce data entry source, if you wanted to replicate what we just built in an automation, you'd create a query that would query the campaign member object For those that were added with a status of add to campaign, it's totally doable, but you'd have to create a query, you have to create a data extension, you have to audit, all the steps that we had just walked through. So, it is kind of cumbersome in that way. So this would be a better option for that simple, relatively simple use case. If it's a little bit more complex, it's like for that example, if we only wanted to pull in leads that had an opportunity of a certain stage, then you'd want to use Automation Studio, a little bit more complex solution. Let's see, Salesforce. So Salesforce data can, Maggie, to your point, that were created or updated and match certain criteria. You can also select only created or only updated, but typically you want created or updated. Depends on your model. Let's see. We have to create a query within Automation Studio to generate a data extension to be consumed in the journey. And later we have to create an activity as well, another automation. That is correct. So you don't necessarily, like we'd walked through when we did the data extension entry source, you don't need a query to build a data extension. You could upload that data right into a data extension, and then you could use it to do those manual sends. But if you want to use an automation to automate that functionality, you'll need to use a query to create that data extension. And then that activity will be created once you turn on the journey, and create an activity in another automation as well. You won't need to create an additional automation. It'll be the same automation that you create. That journey activity will appear in that same automation. Let's see. Can we talk SMS? Yes, great, Maggie. SMS messages is going to be a deep dive session. This is campaigns, but we'd like to have the same SFMC like SFMC. We have a marketing manager that always makes up his campaigns, but we'd like to have the same in SFMC like Salesforce Core in our case. What's the solve for this hairy issue? Okay, so the marketing manager creates those campaigns. You'll be able to Lakshmi's point, they'll be synced into Marketing Cloud. All you will need to know is that campaign ID, and then you'll be able to pull them in, whether it's from the Salesforce data entry source or through a data extension entry source. So that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to build the campaign. Does the journey take only newly created or updated records? No, you have flexibility for last modified. I think that's what is in that Salesforce data entry source would be the last modified, would be the updated. In your query, you'd look for the last modified date. Okay, awesome. Cool. So let's go back into the deck. I know we're running out of time here. We could talk for hours on just these two. Of the big three, data extension and Salesforce data are really the big ones. Another one that's often used are API events. We covered this a little bit in the Data Cloud Bootcamp. This is sort of like a better version of a triggered send. So you're creating a journey with an API event that your third-party system is going to connect and send a journey through. Instead of doing a triggered send, you have to create an entry source. You bring over the API event. We'll show that in a second. So some of the pros for an API event, obviously it's better than a triggered send. Why is it better? I mean, number one, you have all of the journey activities that you can do. A triggered send is just a single send. For those who are interested in the Salesforce CRM environment, a triggered send does not populate the individual email results in CRM. A journey does. It's a little bit easier to provide to devs too. You provide them the API event key, it can be a little bit handy. And you can proof it out. Like your triggered sends are sometimes tricky to, well, you sort of can, you sort of can. Anyways, cons, it does require a couple of extra things, an entry source. There's no real easy way to validate in Marketing Cloud. You have to use something like a postman to replicate, to fire into the journey. And it's a little bit more code dev intense to do that. You have to provide, when you're working for a third party vendor, or even with Salesforce, you have to provide, credentials via the install package, the API entry event key. So what's it good for? Third-party integration. It's also good for Salesforce. This is how one of the options when you're sending the data actions in Data Cloud uses the API entry event, and a good replacement for triggered sends. Let's just quickly jump into the platform and take a look at this entry event. This was an entry event that we had set up for the Data Cloud Bootcamp. So what you first of all need to do is you need to create the data extension before you set up this entry event. So if you go back into our data extension folder, and this was a data extension that was created for the Data Cloud Bootcamp. This is the specific syntax for the fields that was required for that data to come through. So as you're working with your third-party source, you're going to need to create that data extension that aligns with their data values that they are sending in that payload. So first you create that data extension, and then you go into the entry sources. You have to create an entry source. This is what is going to connect it. You're basically to align that API call to the payload, the data extension. So you create, relatively simple to create a data extension. You basically select the data extension that you just created that aligns that entry source. And then when you create the journey itself, you just select, when you add that API event, we'll just do one real quick. You have to select that entry source. So we'll select a journey. Let's call this. We'll go and bring over this API entry event. And this is your list of all those API entry events. The one that you create would be listed on this list. You select it. It's going to select the data extension, drive first trade that you set up. And then when you click done, it's going to give you that event definition key. And that's what you're going to provide to the developer to make that connection along with their credentials. There's specific syntax that you can look in the developer's guide on how to fire an API entry event. So I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to hop back in, give you some tips, and then, well, we'll spend a second just to going through all the other options that are out there. Again, focus on the big three, really the big two, data extension and Salesforce data entry event. A lot of these different other entry events are very specific. So Cloud Pages allows you to align with the smart forms. Event is not an API event like third party, it's just internal. A lot of in-app push mobile entry events for those specific use cases. Again, we'll be covering those in the deep dive. Audience for if you're using Audience Builder, that'll align for that specific entry event. Again, all of these examples could be used in a data extension entry source as well. So we always recommend to try to keep it simple and try to use as few entry sources as you can. And here's some quick tips. If you're, just like we walked through with the Salesforce data entry use case we just walked through, if you've got a lot of functionality, a lot of data points that you're bringing through in a pretty complex journey, break that up and test that functionality separately. So like we did for the Salesforce data entry event, we didn't build out our entire journey with all the different activities, assuming what the values were going to be. We just created the first value, the entry source, populated the data extension to get familiar with that data. That was part one. You have a specific update to a CRM activity, separate that out separately. And then once you've built all those functionalities, then you add it back to the journey. That'll help you prevent creating these massive journeys and then have to rebuild them all over again. Number two, try that Salesforce data entry first, then go back to the data extension entry. But just be wary. Don't push it. If you're struggling with it, it's like the data is like not really coming through, always go back to data extension entry. Important thing to note here, when you're building that entry source, you've activated your journey, you've created that data extension, especially when you've activated that journey. Well, really, when you've activated that journey, if you have to change that data extension, build a new journey. You can do it. You can delete that entry source and you can put in a new data extension. It can create a whole lot of mess. So if you ever need to delete that data extension for an active journey, just rebuild it. Something we didn't cover in detail, but once you've activated a Salesforce data entry event journey, and you need to modify that setting on the left for the entry event, what we walk through, you have to create a new version. You have to stop the previous version in order to make those changes. That's important to note. If you don't stop it, you try to edit it, it's all grayed out and you can't make any changes. And last but not least, create a test set to validate your data points. We walked through how to do that with a Salesforce data entry event. You can also do that for a data extension entry. So since you're in control of those data points, using SQL query, you can run a data extension but not feed it into the journey. So you've got all your data points. And then you can use that to validate your content, your AM script, and make sure all that's working before you actually add all those journey activities. Try to understand your entire data set before you add all those activities and all that functionality. It'll save you some time. I had asked in a question in the chat, how many of us are journey builders, and how many of us have rebuilt journeys? And I was thinking about this. I've done many rebuilding journeys, and I would say like probably 95% of those rebuilds had to do with not thinking through the entry source and all of the data points that it was required and the setup of that data extension. So got to redo the data extension, need a different data extension. That journey basically is worthless. You got to rebuild it. So can't emphasize more spending the time and energy on those entry sources. Okay, more questions. Do we need to use triggered send data extension to use an API entry source data extension? No, great question. That's awesome, great point. Triggered send is its unique template, right? Data extension. For an API entry event, a regular data extension is totally fine. You need to make sure it's sendable though. That's one thing I forgot to mention, a tip. All data extensions associated with Journey Builder, they need to be sendable. Even the ones like the update contact activity, it has to be a sendable data extension for Journey Builder to see it. Let's see, another question. Okay, those are all the questions. We didn't really have enough time to go through the contact model. I can cover that in another session. I've got another session in about a week and a half. Just quickly to cover it, the journey, like JB had said, the journey, there's two different models of data. We sort of saw that when we were going through this, the journey data, the contact data. That journey data, like JB said, is stale. The minute someone enters that journey, that's as fresh as that data is going to be. So if they're in for 3 months in that journey, that journey data is as fresh as when they entered the journey 3 months ago. That's where the contact data comes in place. That's what's in the data designer, all of the different attributes that you are updating on a regular basis using Automation Studio or the synchronized data extensions that are there if you've got the connector. Those will be updated, the synchronized data extensions every 15 minutes, depending on your automation. So that's when you can utilize that data set, all of those attributes in your journey. So an example is you're communicating to leads And you've got multiple different communication points over like a 3-month period just to keep them warm before, as sales are working them. But before you send a communication to them, you want to check the status of that lead. So you'll want to avoid sending them a communication and say that lead closed or the sales is working them. You can't use the journey data for that status. You have to go and use the contact model in a decision split to find the status of that lead, its status of this minute or within the last 15 minutes, help you in your journey path. So that's where the value of the contact model. And then we'll cover the update contact of functionality. This is a tricky one. It seems simple, right? You create a date extension, you drop this into the journey, and it populates a date extension for logging, for information in your journey. It can be a little bit finicky. You have to do this workaround to get the handlebar code to populate those data values right. We'll cover that in another session. It's worth a good 10 minutes on that. And that's it. Example of a use case to use journey data. Example of a use case to use journey. Perfect. In our, let's see, in our date extension here, let's go back to our data extension that we brought from that Salesforce data example. So we're pulling in, this is a default value, but we'll use it as an example. You've got a lead, a 00Q in Salesforce is a lead, a 003 is a contact. In your journey, you might use it and say, okay, I need to check the status of a lead in this journey. Well, a contact doesn't necessarily have a status. They might have a different thing you want to check. You'd have a decision split. You'd use a data point in that journey data to say, okay, for contacts, I want them to go down this path. For leads, I want to have them go down this path. You could also use this as well, but this is typically better. This decision split could be if value begins with 00Q. This, the other path could be if value begins with 003. Will there be any MC Playground to practice these use cases? Yes, sign up for the hands-on sessions. You will be a builder, as Maggie was amazingly yesterday. We're going to be building out these journeys, Salesforce data entry sources, building that from scratch, more complicated. So yeah, please sign up. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Great questions. Sorry about this. Was sort of like a deep dive in entry sources, but it really sets the stage for all the different activities we're going to be covering after that. Yes.
That was fantastic, Tim. Thanks for covering everything in detail. You included all the tips and the best practices as well. So it's like everything you need to know about those specific entry sources. And in the next session, we will look into more of the activities, entry sources and few other activities. So we'll be covering all the out-of-the-box features in the next sessions. Thanks, everyone. And next session is going to be on Tuesday, 8 a.m. Eastern. Thank you and see you again. Bye.